about my intern experience with the ZURZA Environmental Sanitation Foundation in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. First of all, I'd like to thank the Crook Foundation and Strauss Center for the opportunity to experience this internship. It impacted me significantly. What I'd like to do today is do a brief overview of Santo Domingo and the community I was working in, ZURZA. I'm going to talk about their program activities. I'm going to talk about the program impact with the Crook Fellowship and also the work that ZURZA does. And I'm going to talk about how the internship impacted me in terms of my future career. Santo Domingo is the capital of the Dominican Republic. It's a middle-income developing nation, has a strong economy in terms of telecommunications, tourism, and export-oriented economies. Yet its struggle to reduce income inequality and poverty levels are very high. Santo Domingo is home to about 3 million people and produces 5,000 tons of trash every single day. So you can think of a Honda Civic as about a ton of trash. When I was working in the community of La ZURZA, it's an informal settlement. It's located next to the Isabel River. They call it La ZURZA for these springs that are there on the left. It's a very dense settlement. There's about 20,000 inhabitants, and it's home to a large agricultural market. Santo Domingo is home to a lot of informal settlements or slums. These informal settlements are often located in floodplains and on steep slopes. They experience a lack of infrastructure. They're characterized by precarious housing, and there's high levels of poverty in these communities. In particular, they struggle with solid waste management. There's a lack of adequate solid waste management services in these communities, so residents there resort to throwing waste in empty lots and then creeks and waterways. And so this presents problems when it rains. It clogs up these urban drainage ways and exposes these residents to environmental risk, public health risk, environmental degradation. However, there's hope here. ZURZA, the organization I was working with, is a community foundation that contracts with the city to provide solid waste management services in this community. Their mission is to improve the quality of life of residents through political, social, and economic development, and they primarily do this through the solid waste management services they provide. They also do other social programs, working with young people, working with women, doing infrastructure projects. And in terms of the Crook Fellowship, my program activities primarily consisted of doing a performance audit of their solid waste management and then providing them with a final consultation report that contained over 20 recommendations to improve their efficiency and effectiveness. So just to give you a little taste of what this looks like in terms of solid waste management, it all starts with the street sweeping crew who goes out at 6 in the morning, hits the streets, piles litter and other debris into large piles for collection. And the crew also goes out and picks out recycling, such as plastics and cardboards. These settlements are characterized by dense housing. There's narrow alleys, there's twists and turns, the land use patterns are organized. And so they use handcart collection to go house to house to collect waste so that folks don't throw it in the creeks. From these handcarts and the street sweeping crews, they pile into strategic locations that are located in larger roads where compactor vehicles can pass by. They load it up into these vehicles and take it to the waste transfer station. At the transfer station, they take it out of their compactor trucks and load it into 18-wheelers for final disposal in the landfill. This is also a point where the trucks get weighed and the city notes how much they hauled and they pay them based on the tonnage that they dispose of. ZURZA also has a recycling component to their environmental mission. In particular, there's a crew that goes out house to house, talks with the neighbors, and talks about environmental education, how to recycle, what to recycle. It's a very personable activity, very sociable. Once they've collected the recycling, it gets loaded up and taken to a recycling center. ZURZA is one of 6 organizations doing very similar work in Santo Domingo, and they share this facility. This facility, they're sorting, they're processing, they're using the baler to make these bales for sale to end users. So in terms of the program impact of the Crook Fellowship, I was able to contribute the performance audit and the consultation report. For the performance audit, I went out with each of these different program activities, observed their operations in the field, I interviewed staff members, and then I reported back to supervisors and got feedback on my findings. Then I took those findings and developed a consultation report that included over 20 recommendations. This report was intended to have an impact in 2 ways. One, to improve their internal operations in terms of how they do their work. And then also so they could take this document and use it as a leverage for funding for outside organizations. Say, we have an outside consultation report that says we need more support to expand our recycling operations, for example. I learned a number of things during my time in Santo Domingo. I observed a lot of double loading of waste when people would collect waste in a handcart, for example, put it on the ground and then reload it to trucks. And so I was able to point out some of these areas that they could reduce, improve their efficiency. I also noted things that they did well. For example, the recycling outreach. It was such a sociable activity and the residents really engaged there. I said, we need to expand this activity to encourage people to recycle more. And then personally, I learned kind of the incremental and iterative nature of international development work. It's a process. You can't just go in and say, let's do this, and from the next day it's going to happen. So you really have to have a longer term view. I also learned how to adapt my own personal perspectives coming in as an outsider to the local context. And that kind of leads into my career impact. My previous experience is I was a director of a recycling center for about 7 years, and did solid waste management consultation for a number of years. And so I was able to combine that experience with my graduate training here at LBJ to produce this well-researched, well-analyzed report for them that hopefully will benefit their organization. And then in terms of my future career goals, the Crook Fellowship was incredibly impactful. It allowed me to see firsthand what international development work looks like, experience that in the field, and it's inspired me to continue in the international development field, particularly focusing on solid waste management in these informal settlements. So with that, thank you for your time, and please email me if you have any questions.
Hi, I'm Anna Coons, and I'm a second-year dual degree student here at the LBJ School in the School of Public Health. And I spent my summer as a Crook Fellow at the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network in Washington, D.C. So first, I thought it would be helpful to just place this internship in my experience and explain why, if I'm interested in international development, I wanted to spend a summer in D.C. And the answer is that for the past 5 years before I returned to grad school, I was working as a project coordinator for the Center for Health Policy and Inequalities Research at Duke University, and I was managing various global health interventions and projects, mostly for vulnerable children in countries like Cambodia, India, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. And I was visiting partner organizations at these sites regularly to help them carry out the work that we were contracting with them to do. And as I was doing that, it kind of opened a new set of questions for me into how these organizations were struggling to deal with international mandates that were coming down and how those were affecting development in their community. And they weren't sure where their voice was in that. And they weren't sure how to use the research that they were contributing to affect change that they wanted to see in their own communities. And meanwhile, the research team that I was a part of was contributing to this huge evidence base, but I wasn't always sure why policymakers weren't reading it. And so I wanted to come back to school and figure out where those gaps were and continue to work on serving the well-being of vulnerable populations by looking at kind of the whole spectrum of international development work from top to bottom and learning more. So what is the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network, or MFAN as I quickly learned to call it? It's a reform coalition in DC consisting of many, many partner organizations and agencies who are all committed to improving U.S. foreign assistance around two big pillars. First of which is accountability, which consists of transparency, meaning are they publishing their own data? Are they publishing where they're spending money on what and how? Monitoring and evaluation, are they keeping track of their own goals and whether the projects that they're doing are meeting those goals effectively? And learning, are they taking the lessons from that monitoring and evaluation work and turning it into better decisions in the future? And that feeds back into transparency. Are they publishing those lessons that they've learned in an open way so that the whole international development community can learn from them? And the second pillar is country ownership, meaning are we actually treating these developing countries as partners in their own development? Are they participating in the work that's happening, and are their priorities informing our priorities of what we're trying to do so that our work can really be sustainable? And where is MFAN? It is in downtown Washington, D.C., and I was literally running and sweating all over the city this summer. And this very long list is just sort of representative of the crash course of how overwhelming it was for me at times to feel like I was going to all these places and trying to figure out how all the puzzle pieces fit together. It included going to USAID and the State Department. That awkward selfie of me at the bottom is me in front of the State Department. And advocacy organizations and think tanks like Brookings and the Lugar Center and many, many NGOs, including Save the Children and Bread for the World. This is the team I was working with at MBAN, and they describe themselves as a lean, mean machine, and they were right. They are really committed and driven, and since they're just a small team that's kind of working to network between all of these different partners, they each have a really specific role in what they're doing, and I was able to get a taste of what each of them are contributing to in the work at MFAN, but in particular, Didier Trin on the far right, who's their director, and I were able to have some great conversations about the future of development and development work, and the politics of informing change in the system. And my excellent supervisor, Stephanie, in the purple, was invaluable to me in teaching me everything I now know about the U.S. policy and legislative process, everything from who's who and what their stake is in it to what appropriations even are. So what was I actually doing? I was going to all these various organizations, like I listed, representing MFAN at meetings and events and working groups, and helping them synthesize all of these conversations that were happening into trying to figure out what are the policy windows for MFAN around their two agenda items. Where can they continue to enact change? So we were meeting with lots of different people in lots of different settings, including an event that I helped them put on the Hill around financing for development. And I know it's so tiny you can't see it, but that's the Millennium Challenge Corporation CEO, Dana Hyde, right there, and I was geeking out to get to meet her. So I was really a full part of their strategic work around what they were doing. And I was also really excitingly there for a summer in which two landmark pieces of legislation became part of the law, which is the Global Food Security Act and the Foreign Aid Transparency and Accountability Act, which have been worked on for many, many years by this team that I was a part of, and it was really exciting to be there to see all of their hard work come to fruition and be a part of understanding what that meant. And what did I learn? A text-heavy slide representing so much. But I learned about how the process of legislating U.S. foreign assistance works, and the nitty-gritty down, like up to the high levels, how it is influencing but also influenced by the NGO and think tank and private sector agencies that are surrounding it. I got a window into what the current debates and conversations are that are happening. What are the things people are all really excited about? Where are the gaps that people aren't paying as much attention to in international development work? And a lot of that was also seeing what the current state of development work is. And so some of the things that came up very frequently were these recipient country priorities, meaning how are we actually going to measure whether we're incorporating country ownership, and what are the political implications of that? And speaking of political implications, the refugee crisis that's happening right now highlighted and elevated the divide between the humanitarian aid and development aid communities that's happening. Also, financing for development work, as global need is outstripping our global aid pocket at the moment. How can we think outside of the box about new ways to innovate and more effectively reach people in extreme poverty? And as if I haven't said them enough already, monitoring and evaluation, data use, and organizational learning were constant parts of the conversation. How can we move from having these be our favorite buzzwords to actually integral parts of the DNA of our development systems, and actually enact the change that we're all hoping that they will help us enact? And personally in my career as I move forward, this was just really an invaluable experience to get to see from a bird's eye view how all of these different arenas of international development work come together and interact much more confident in being able to understand how to move between these different worlds and continue to help bridge the gaps between research and policy change and locally driven solutions. So it really was an amazing, incredible experience, and I'm so grateful to the Crook Foundation for their support this summer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'd love to start by thanking the Crook Foundation and Mrs. Crook so much for having us and supporting us, and the Strauss Center for hosting. So my name's Laura Richards. I'm a dual degree student here at the LBJ School getting a master's in global policy, and also at the business school getting a master's in business administration. I was fortunate enough to get the Crook Fellowship and get to travel to Kampala, Uganda this summer, where I worked with the Women of Uganda Network, also with the crafty nickname WOGNET. So I was originally hired by AidData. They are an accountability organization based here in the US, and they use data to analyze different large-scale and small-scale aid projects and consider the effectiveness and impact of those. So I traveled to Virginia and got a week-long training, and then after that was off to Kampala, where the Women of Uganda Network hosted me. So first, like to give you a quick little window into the world of life in Kampala. Maybe the most colorful place I've ever been. From the markets to the lush greenery, it was gorgeous. And I got to take a boda, which is a motorcycle taxi, to and from work, which is a fun way to travel around the country. They have holidays such as Heroes Day, where President Museveni got to choose the heroes for the year and award those. And then their music is incredibly upbeat. You can hear it playing from the halls of the churches every hour of the day. So my primary role working with Women of Uganda Network was to create maps. So I was the GIS mapping and tech intern. So I mapped, I think 94 women's organizations throughout the country, and was able to gather information on each of them based on where they were, what kind of work they did, what their target audience was, whether or not their services were free or not, and made an interactive map so that women throughout the country who have access to the internet were able to access information on services, any kind of service they could need. They could search by service, search by location, but it was not just for women, but it was also for practitioners and other development organizations so that they could connect and find out who's doing the kind of work they're doing and who's doing no work at all in certain parts of the country. So, as any of you know who work in small NGOs, you wear a lot of different hats. So although I was mainly there to make maps, I got to travel around the country and do a variety of trainings and work with a variety of groups. One of those groups was the Apache Women Entrepreneurs Association. So they actually weren't an organization until we got there. We brought them together, and we helped them lay out a mandate, a vision, vote on chairperson, finance director, and other leadership roles. And actually in that day, they started a microbank. And for those of you who have studied development, you know that microbanking is it's one of the large topics kind of in the literature right now, because these women who have started a variety of different small businesses can't get access to capital because they don't have assets to back up a loan of any kind. So they got together and decided to save a small amount each week and give that to their finance woman, who's a woman nicknamed Mama in the community, just a respected woman who is quite lovely. And she'd hold the money for a year. And at the end of that year, they would have millions of Ugandan shillings, which is about 33 cents. But it's a lot of money there. It can go a long way. And only people who put into this microbank can pull out of it. And so it was really, really incredible to be a part of that. Also, while I was up in northern Uganda, I was asked to do an interview on women's issues with Radio Patch, which as a Westerner going into a foreign company and talking about, or a foreign country doing an interview on women's issues was a little bit uncomfortable. But I was able to reflect that and have a really frank discussion with the person interviewing me about my perspective and how I viewed my role there. So that was a great experience. In addition, while we were in northern Uganda, we got to do a training with voluntary social accountability communities, also with the crafty nickname, VSAC. So this is 75% women, all farmers, who volunteer their time, and they don't have a lot of free time, to come together and monitor the service delivery of roads, hospitals, educational facilities, and we train them how to use basic technology in order to monitor the progress of various services, and then report those to us and to our connections with some pro bono legal offices, so that we could bring in government stakeholders and have the conversation, why is this not getting developed, or why was the work really shoddy? And it worked in this small community. The women talked about how much of a difference they had made in getting work done and getting work done right in their community. So that was pretty cool to be a part of. Additionally, I was able to travel with another organization, OpenStreetMap, to Kigali to do a massive mapping training. More than 80 people showed up. We expected less than half that on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m. So it really shows you that these kind of trainings that are legitimate and with hard skills, with a variety of mapping tools, just aren't there. So people really showed up and were engaged. It was an incredible group of young innovators, and I was really, really proud to get to work with them for a day. And finally, one of the major tasks that I had with my colleagues while I was there was to work with the university. We did trainings every week on different skills, everything from data analysis, GIS mapping, and then we brought everyone together at the end and did what you call a hackathon. Hackathons can look many different ways. Ours, again, had 80 plus people. People formed multidisciplinary teams, and at the beginning of the day, we gave them a task, and we decided on Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate change. And they worked for 10 hours straight without a break, and they put together different solutions or tools to mitigate, monitor, or deal with climate change in Uganda. And we were really surprised and proud that the Minister of Science, Technology, and the Environment came, and he invited all of the participants to come forth to his office, even if they didn't win that day, and propose their ideas, because the president has made a mandate to bring in young innovators into some of the solutions that they're working on. So what impact did this have for my career? It's been invaluable, I think, as Anna also said. I hadn't been able to do any development work up until this point, so I got to work on the ground with a variety of nonprofit and other organizations, and do everything from training to implementation, facilitating a variety of changes. So that was incredible experience that really motivated me to continue with this work. So looking forward, I'm hoping to work maybe with a larger scale organization and monitor some larger scale development projects in the future. So thank you so much. This project has meant so much to me.
Hello, my name is Aaron Milner. I'm going to talk to you about my experience over the summer at the DC-based foreign policy think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, where I was a research intern for 2 of the conjoined international development teams. At the end of the summer in August, I was promoted to a full-time staff program coordinator position where, in addition to my research, I also helped set up and coordinate events. When I graduate from the DC inaugural cohort in December, I will continue on at CSIS as a research associate, where I can begin to publish my own original thoughts and research questions. Like I said, in addition to work, I also took night classes. What you see here before you is a picture from the New York Times cover article that came out this summer, trying to expose think tanks as real undercover lobbyist organizations. And I wanted to use this picture mainly because it was the front of CSIS, and that's also my boss standing on the curb. But it also kind of framed my viewpoint going into DC and really helped me kind of understand the DC landscape and what it takes to get development agendas passed in this town. Before I get started, I just wanted to thank Mrs. Crook. Thank you so much for making this possible. I'm so proud to have your name attached to my experiences now. I really can't wait to continue on the legacy in DC and make you proud. I wish I could be down there to thank you personally. I also wanted to thank Ann Clary, for whom this would also not be possible, for helping me coordinate everything over about 1,000 miles these past few months. Also, congratulations to my fellow fellows. I've loved reading about your work all over the globe all summer. I was very jealous being in muggy DC and reading about everybody's cool experiences, but I know you'll be joining me up here soon. Let's jump into an agenda here. Since think tanks aren't the general thing you would think of as a development implementer, I want to talk about their role and CSIS's role in development, talk about what I did over the summer, and then the future for myself and development. So the development landscape around DC. Like I said, I think Congress is really the key global agent of international development because they control the US budget, which is the world's largest funder by far of international development. Some people argue USAID, OPIC, IFC, one of these groups is really the key body, but they all report back to Congress. So I think Congress is really the key agent. And so because of CSIS's relationship with Congress and our influence on Congress producing reports, interacting daily with congressional officials, I thought this would be a really great place to start my, my international development career. Beyond that, we also work with USAID every day. We've had people from the Asian Development Bank. As you see in this picture here, that's the Vice President of the Asian Development Bank, the gentleman speaking on the left. So I got to meet him, and I've gotten to meet a ton of other development implementers across the industry. From the diplomatic community, I've become quite close to the Embassy of Afghanistan throughout my research. So that's been a really cool part of the experience. So CSIS is generally known as an international security think tank. About 80% of our revenue comes from our security team. They have their whole floor, and they're very cut off. We're not really allowed to go up there. But the development team started about 5 years ago with the idea to really increase the role of the private industry and innovation in development. This is another reason why I think it was kind of perfect for my experience. I really believe in the role of the private sector in development. And my research has really taken off over the summer and has focused on the thesis that private sector investment will surpass public sector investment in development in the next few years. So that was my principal research project over the summer, and I can talk about that when I talk about my role a little bit more. CSIS, more about CSIS, it's supposed to be a bipartisan organization, which I really appreciate. We have such a diverse level of engagement and people who come to speak at our events. From this picture, you can see the woman on the far left. She's the head of the Free Yazidi Foundation. The woman on the far right is the head of human rights advocacy for Google. So we get these very diverse groups come and talk here and offer their opinions and their viewpoints and their expertise every day. So I'm really learning so much on the job every day I'm here. So our specific programs, we have two conjoined development teams. The only difference between them is one is exclusively funded by one corporate partner, while the other one is funded by diplomatic communities, foreign governments, the US government, whatever donors we can find. We are a nonprofit though, so it's not like we're making a ton of money off these. But that's one thing that was referenced in the New York Times article. One thing I can say is that I would say we never come back with specific answers that these corporate partners want. That's what makes us different from a consulting company. We come back with, we start with a research question, while I think consulting companies start with an answer, and we come back, and sometimes our clients really are not happy with the answer we have for them about foreign policy development in general. So this picture here is from us testifying in Congress. I know I look very asleep there on the right in the House or in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee room, but I promise I'm just taking notes. So there I am again, my spotlight on C-SPAN over the summer. I know you all watch that and stream that in class every day. So onto my role a little bit. So I mentioned my principal research project over the summer. My boss has a thesis that private sector investment will surpass public sector official development assistance, otherwise known as ODA, in the next few years. There's a few different reasons why he thinks this will happen. One is a lot of the isolationist rhetoric that's coming out of the US and other parts of the Western world that have really been responsible for a lot of the international development. As you can see in the current elections and then Brexit, There's been a lot of calls to reinvest in domestic concerns, given the issues at home and given the idea that a lot of international development doesn't work. So, but this presents a tremendous opportunity for the private sector to reinvest billions of dollars, and we've seen a lot of that grow. So over the summer, I've been collecting data from what are called development finance institutions, which are kind of public-private arms that leverage private sector funds to invest in development initiatives around the world. What this meant for me was looking at the 32 development institutions, or DFIs, around the world and collecting data from each of these for the past 15 years. It really probably doesn't seem that much work, but just gathering that all up, it was basically looking at PDFs from 32 different banks for the past 16 years. So I think I totaled it up at one point, and I looked at over 17,000 pages of financial documents to create this financial trend of trying to do a financial model of how much private sector investment has exploded recently. A lot of that is due to increased innovation and private sector engagement. When I got to get out of the office, it was a great experience over the summer. Here's me. This is actually part of school where I got to meet Vince Young there at the Capitol on the right, and I got to go to the Democratic National Convention. So produce other research and publications. I got to help out with a lot of research delving into the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and Planet Colombia. I researched recently a lot Afghanistan, and that's how I became very close to the Afghanistan ambassador. And I've got to already publish quite a few things. I published a blog on the use of drones in international development. Like I mentioned, my key passion in kind of development is introducing technology into the developing world. Recently, I've started to hold a lot of events at CSIS, which means I've got to meet a ton of people. I've met, let's see, I think 3 senators, 1 congressman, a couple of ex-presidents, ex-heads of states. So it's been a really great experience, and just like I said, the level of access I have to the DC development community has been pretty incredible. The Global Development Forum is our key thing and a key event throughout the year. We're going to have a great keynote speaker this year, and I get to head that all up. So what I see as the future of development, like I said, I think private finance will really take off and will pass public sector investment in the next few years. My financial model is not complete. We're actually presenting it next Friday, so if you're curious, you can tune into the live stream. But another hopeful thing I see is development is access to capital throughout the developing world. And there's a lot of south-to-south investment now, where you see former developing countries, such as India, now investing in other developing countries and poorer countries. And it really reduces the level of colonialism people think that development is. So that's a really positive sign to see. The future for me, as I said, I've been offered a full-time job in DC, so I will stick around CSIS for a while. It's unknown if I want to stick around in the private sector or go into public service at some point. But I do want to focus on urbanization, technology, and regionally I would like to focus on Europe and Central Asia. Like I said earlier, I just really want to thank Mrs. Crook for this incredible opportunity. I've been happy to be a representative for the program and for the Crook name, and I've been really impressed with my colleagues, and I want to thank Ann Clary. Thank you so much for helping me through all this. I can't wait to get down in Austin to see all the great work everybody's doing, and please come visit me in DC some point. Thank you so much. Bye.
Hi everyone, I'm Patricia Zavala. I'm a second-year dual degree master's student here at LBJ School and in Latin American Studies. I want to say thank you so much to the Crook Foundation and the Strauss Center for really helping me to have one of the most incredible summers of my life, and I'm not just saying that, it really was. So I did my internship at the United Nations Development Program in Geneva. It is the second largest United Nations office outside of the UN headquarters in New York. In the year 2012 alone, this building, the Nation's Palace, had 10,000 intergovernmental meetings. So to be there on the ground was a really exciting moment because there's so many things going on, and Rhea, you know that too because she was there with me. Just a quick overview. I'll give a big picture about climate change, the work that's being done on it, the objectives of the organization that I was working for, called the Climate Vulnerable Forum, the actions that they take, my work, the lessons that I learned, and my future career. So the Climate Vulnerable Forum, it says a global partnership of vulnerable countries. So vulnerable to what? to climate change. These are the 43 countries that are most directly impacted and vulnerable to the devastating impacts of climate change. They're countries throughout Asia, Africa, the Pacific, Latin America, and they have the least amount of resources and least capacity to deal with the impacts of climate change. So what they're calling for is for developed countries to step up to the plate. Because the developed countries have more resources, more capacity, more financial ability to address climate change, they're encouraging all the developed nations to invest in an immediate transition to a low carbon economy. So how do we transition from our current economy that's based on fossil fuels to a low emission economy? So like you're saying, those big hard questions, get in the middle of it, try to figure it out. So what are the goals of the Climate Vulnerable Forum? Well, here you can see that this is the group of the finance ministers, environmental ministers, economic ministers from the 43 different countries. They work to share information with each other, different technologies such as off-the-grid solar, different financial mechanisms like climate insurance and risk pooling mechanisms to deal when the climate event hits. And they also do, they also work to raise awareness about the impacts of climate change. And they're very influential in helping to set the global climate policy agenda. So I'm sure you all have heard about the Paris Agreement from the Conference of Parties, the UN Framework for Climate Change, and they've been instrumental in making sure that the needs of communities that are directly impacted by climate change are represented in the global policy agenda. So they help to raise awareness about the communities that are directly impacted, such as this one. This is cool, okay. This is a community in the Pacific Islands who literally their livelihoods, their lives, everything is at risk. They're experiencing major sea level rise, and if we don't do something immediate and aggressive, then their island is literally going to be wiped off the map. So it's important that their voices are heard, and here they say, we are not drowning, we are fighting, and that's really important. So communities all across the world are organizing, they're coming together, they're making their voice heard, and they're asking for aggressive climate action for climate justice. They conduct research as well, so they look at the benefits of transitioning to a low carbon economy, and also what happens if we pass 2 degrees of global warming. What are the consequences? What will we lose? How will all of our lives be impacted? And I think that we're all a little bit anxious about climate change. What's happening? What's going to happen? How our lives are being impacted? And luckily, we have a lot of resources to adapt, but other communities don't. They also influence policy. So this is inside the UN chambers. And so they help to set the agenda for global accords such as the Paris Agreement. And they also, this is cut off, they also mobilize finances. So 20 of their finance ministers are part of something called the Vulnerable 20. So it's 20 finance ministers that have come together with the goal of getting developed countries to contribute $100 billion to developing countries so that they can invest in low emission infrastructure and a low emission economy. So, you know, changing the way we do agricultural practices, the infrastructure, the energy systems. So we need money to do that. So they're really critical in making that happen as well. So what did I do there? So as you can see, as you can see here, there's a report that came out right when I was getting there. So I helped to, on the release of this report and organize a conference that happened on the impacts of climate change of heat in the workplace. So with rising climates, how do agricultural workers continue to work outside when their bodies experience heat stress and heat stroke? How do manufacturers that are inside workshops continue to work when it's so hot that they pass out and they faint? So there's a lot of economic consequences of climate change. And so businesses and workers came together for this meeting to talk about these issues. And these are different finance ministers from different countries coming together and talking about these issues. What is that? You may ask. So this is Europe's largest electric car rally. I don't know if you've ever heard of an electric car rally, but I helped to coordinate one of Europe's largest. And they traveled over 1,000 miles, all the way from northern Germany down to the Alps to Switzerland, and they parked their cars right in front of the United Nations building, forming 1.5 C, which is 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the majority of scientists around the world say we have to stop global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. We cannot surpass it, otherwise we're facing irreparable harm and damage to our communities and ecosystems. So that was really cool. It's an aerial shot, got a little helicopter going above it. I also got to do research and writing. I helped to publish a chapter on the low carbon monitor, which is about to be published. This is not what it actually looks like, but it gives you an idea of the report that I worked on. And it talks about the benefits, the economic benefits of transitioning to a low carbon economy. There's tremendous work opportunities for people working in green energy, green technology. So how do we have green growth in a way that isn't going to impact our economy but can continue to address climate change? This was one of my favorites. I got to work on the climate change Olympics campaign. So climate change has a really big impact on the Olympics. It makes it really hard for Olympic athletes to perform in their sports because of excess heat or melting of snow. Athletes, runners, it's very difficult for them because of climate change to continue to perform at the same highest level that they used to be able to. So our record, or our logo was the 1.5C is the record we must not break. Get it? Because everyone's there to break records, but that was the one record we shouldn't break. Okay. That was really funny. So we partnered with an organization in New York. They were on the ground in Rio coordinating with the athletes that I was calling the National Olympic Committees of the 43 countries to get their athletes to meet up in Rio and take pictures for this campaign. And so this is weightlifter David Katuatu. He's from Kiribati, and his island is about to go underwater. He's already lost his home to a cyclone, and he does Olympic weightlifting, and in order to get attention and be on the national stage, every time he breaks a record, he does a dance. And so he's known as the weightlifter that dances for climate change. So I said, we have to get him. So we were able to coordinate, and we got him on the ground, and he said, hey, can you take a picture and be a part of our campaign? And he said, yeah, and so that's him, the dancing weightlifter fighting for climate change. So we were able to do kind of this grassroots organizing with people directly impacted by climate change and raise their voices to the international level and the global stage through this campaign. And it kind of showed the ability to do both grassroots, bottom-up, and top-down organizing, kind of this vertical integration of how we can create change and make us transition to a low-carbon economy. So where am I going next? Well, I'd like to continue to do research through about low-carbon economy. Thank you to the Strauss Center again for giving me the opportunity to be a Brumley Next Generation Research Fellow. I'm working with Dr. Weaver to continue my research about how we can transition to low carbon economy using agricultural methods. And so luckily I have some travel funds, which thanks again to the Strauss Center. So hopefully I'll be able to go to the United Nations Climate Change Conference this year in November in Marrakesh and participate in some of the conferences and events going around about low emissions solutions. And where do I go next? Okay, so long-term Does anyone know who this is? It's Todd Stern. He's the U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Change. He's the chief negotiator for the United States within the UN framework. So he's the one at the table setting the policies and rules for the global agenda for climate change, and I'd like to have his job someday. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Ryan, either fortunately or unfortunately named, depending on how you want to look at that. I spent my summer in Kathmandu, Nepal. I was working with an organization called ISET Nepal. And before I begin, I'd like to once again thank Eleanor Crook and just the Strauss Center, just everyone who had a part in my wonderful summer, where I was working with the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, which might lead you to ask, who is the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition? Which is a great question. So the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, or ISET, has one very, very simple philosophy. They are saying climate change is coming and we need to prepare for it. They're not necessarily interested in why it's coming, who caused it, or what's happening. What they are interested in is preparing Nepal for the transition that's going to happen, particularly inside rural communities. So what they're looking at is these subsistence farmers, how are they going to survive when certain crops are not able to be cultivated, or as the weather patterns change, what happens to these areas which will be very drastically affected by landslides, flooding, drought, etc. So they do a lot of reports working with the Nepali government in order to make that transition as strong as possible. Now, what I did for these fine folks is I had a very, very simple task, and that was to teach them how to use ArcGIS. So every single day for 3 months, I had an hour-long class wherein we found a topic they were interested in or something that they wanted to do, and we worked on it through ArcGIS. Started off very simply, very, very simple things. This is how you load a file. This is how you make a shape map or a shape file or something along those lines. And then we started working towards these are the tasks that your bosses are giving you. This is how we can use ArcGIS in order to make those tasks better, in order to allow you to display these tasks, in order to allow you to present a better product at the end of the day. I also came through at a fairly fortunate time. They were doing a transition. They had one person who kind of through trial and error had learned some ArcGIS, and he was going off to bigger and better things inside Europe. He had just gotten accepted to a master's program, gotten funding. So it became my position to then train the staff in order to prepare for his transition out. So we made sure that we had a working group of people who had a base knowledge of it, and then we found 2 or 3 subject matter experts who then became the new ArcGIS people for that organization. Additionally, throughout the entire time, I did a lot of work in a support capacity. They were really interested in getting data out there, similar to AidData, who also, similar to Laura, connected me with ISET Nepal. They were interested in distributing as much information as they could to as many people who needed it. So I helped them to get their data into a form that could be shared with other organizations that were interested in the kind of information that they were looking at. Now, once again, this may lead you to ask, what is ArcGIS? Now, ArcGIS is a mapping software, and the really important thing about it is that it briefs exceptionally well. If you can't tell by my ability to speak louder than is required, I used to be in the military. And if you've ever worked with government officials, you know that they love pictures, and as much information as you can get into a simple picture as possible, the better off your brief is going to be, and the more the people who you want to take away information are going to take away that information. So it also, a really good second benefit of ArcGIS is it places data in a form that can be transferred to other organizations. So ArcGIS is used in a fairly widespread fashion. So it allows other people who are using ArcGIS to take this information and to see the exact same thing that you're seeing and to work on it in the exact same way that you're working with. So it was a really big moment for ISET Nepal in order to kind of enter into the larger development scene. Because they were a fairly small organization, about 20 people, all Nepali, but they wanted to be a little bit more involved globally. Now, there were some successes and there were a couple challenges. From the success side, I got to work with an organization that informs Nepali policy. That's awesome. There are laws on the books because of ISET. There are laws on the books because of information that I help these people work with. That's phenomenal. I can't express how amazing that makes me feel. I also got to help them do that transition that I told you about. I made sure that these people were able to continue doing what they were doing, and for them to do it as well as they could, and they have a new staff, they're set up, and they're working wonderfully. Also, in terms of just flat out numbers, we had 10 ArcGIS platforms that were allotted to us through Aid Data. I trained 10 people on how to use ArcGIS. That's half of their organization. It was wonderful to do that, and it's nice to have that baseline of knowledge that we were then able to spread out. Now, from the other side, there were a few challenges. Infrastructure was probably one of the largest challenges that we had to deal with. Simply put, Nepal is going through a lot of recovery after the earthquakes. From the infrastructure side, this happened on two areas. The first one in particular, connection to the internet. We had about 1.5 megabytes a second to share with 20 different people. So things were extremely slow. Anything I had to upload, I had to take my lunch at different times in order to make sure other people weren't using the internet. Otherwise, it would have just timed out on me. The Nepali government in and of itself was a bit difficult. And that's not to say that they weren't cooperative, because they absolutely were. But there's a lot of different political organizations that were going on in Nepal. And there were a few times where they would declare a day of protest, and we all just ended up having to take the day off because they said no cars will be on the roads, so no one could get to work. And it was kind of interesting to work around that. And it was interesting to get the perspective of the people that lived there and to hear their opinions and their thoughts on these different political groups. Also slow to change. It turns out when you're changing an organization, it takes a little bit of time. And so there was a lot of back and forth between myself and the higher ups. As they were introduced to this new ArcGIS, as they were able to use it in a capacity that was more than simply look at this pretty picture that we can put occasionally on a page, but they could use it to analyze data and to present data. I had to work with the higher ups in order to make sure that they were assigning tasks that were ArcGIS specific. So there was a lot of back and forth that kind of went between me and the higher ups. And finally, transportation. I went there during what's called the monsoon season. And if anyone's seen Forrest Gump, one of my favorite shows, he isn't lying when he says one day it starts raining, and then it just doesn't stop. And so anytime we had to leave Kathmandu, anytime that there was a field visit or anything like that, it was an activity. Simply because you didn't know if there would be a landslide, you didn't know if you would have to stay in a village for a couple extra nights while they cleared it. You didn't know if the road was going to be there anymore. So it was interesting to have these challenges and to figure out ways to work around them. Now, takeaways. So from my end, ArcGIS training and experience was a massive takeaway for me. I had done a little bit of it in the military. I was an intelligence analyst in the Army. And so we worked with ArcGIS briefly in the beginning, but it was really nice to start mapping things that weren't battalions or ammo depots, and to change that to rivers, roads, and much more humanitarian-focused efforts. Additionally, teaching, something that I found out that I absolutely loved, and will probably continue to shape my career moving forward. I'm starting to look into a PhD now. I really enjoyed having a classroom. I really enjoyed having a group of people that I could speak to and have conversations with, and planning out a lesson. They even had a teacher's day, and I got a lot of sweets, which was delightful. I strongly recommend that. Also, insights into the development world. It was really interesting to me to see this new world that I was kind of moving into. I've worked with the Army. I've had the resources of the military behind me, which, if you follow politics at all, pretty vast. It turns out that we fund our military quite well, and so it was very interesting to transition towards a more aid and development area with 20 local Nepali people who were just kind of making do with what they had, and it was really it was fun to see how they would work and to help them figure out how they could do as much as they could given the resources that they were given. And finally, and part of this is on a personal level, but also on a connections level, I made some great new friends, and so. With that, I'm actually able to help them continue to do what I worked on this summer. There's someone in my pharmacy class of all places who's actually very interested in climate change and very, very interested in mapping. So I'm able to hook those people up to ensure that what I started this summer is able to continue moving forward. But once again, I wanted to say thank you to everyone involved. Thank you very, very much.
My name is TOPPENBERG. I am a dual degree student here at the LBJ School and at the School of Public Health. I spent this summer working with BRENT for the World Institute in Washington, D.C. BRENT for the World is a nonprofit Christian organization that advocates to end hunger both domestically and abroad, and is also graciously supported by the Crook Foundation. So specifically within BRENT for the World, I worked at the Institute, and the Institute is the policy arm for BRENT for the World and provides policy analysis for BRENT for the World's advocacy campaigns and their lobbying efforts. They cover a range of issues related to hunger, including poverty, affordable housing, excuse me, mass incarceration, disparities, things like that. They also produce an annual report called the Hunger Report that does an in-depth analysis on an aspect of hunger. And this year's 2015's was the connection between hunger and health. So this summer, I spent the majority of my time working on the Sustainable Development Goals. They're also referred to as the SDGs. The SDGs are a UN-led global goals initiative that includes 193 countries, and it's going to take place over 15 years. They were adopted last year, and they'll go from 2015 to 2003. As you can see, there are 17 goals in total, with 169 targets to meet those goals and over 230 indicators to measure the progress towards meeting those goals. The SDGs are unique in the fact that they center around this unifying belief that no one should be left behind in the pursuit of sustainable development, and that progress needs to happen for all people at all levels across the globe in order for these set of goals to truly be successful. As I mentioned earlier, the goals are meant for both developed and developing countries, so that includes the United States. And while we've started working here in the United States on the goals internationally, we really haven't had any sort of official conversation about the goals domestically. So my project this summer was to research how we're measuring the goals in the United States. And so while there are many international organizations that are looking at the SDGs across countries, measuring them across countries, it's really up to each individual country to develop their own measurement plan for how they're going to track the goals within their own country. And it's really, I was asked to work on this project because it's really important in looking at improving human conditions, policy that's improving human conditions, to have some sort of evaluation plan in place, because no matter how well-intentioned a policy is, if it's not working, it's not doing any good, and we need to have a way to measure whether or not it's working. So the culmination of my research was a brief looking at the first two sustainable development goals, no poverty and zero hunger, and kind of figuring out where the United States is in its measurement plan. The focus was to identify indicators that are both global in nature, so we can use them to compare across countries, but that are also still capturing the unique aspects of hunger and poverty here in the United States. Excuse me. So the good news is that we already measure a lot of these indicators, and that we have even more data that we could be measuring, more indicators. But while we're fortunate to have a really robust data collection system here in the United States, we don't consistently disaggregate data across the subpopulations and geographic locations that we really need to ensure that we're measuring progress for all people. And moreover, there are some communities that are continually left out of government data collection, such as homeless people, undocumented persons, and the LBGT community. And we really need to ensure that we're capturing their perspectives and their experiences in these, in hunger and poverty as well. So the Institute was a part of an SDG coalition with other NGOs in DC. And so there is hope. There are people working on this on the domestic side. But it really will be imperative for the federal government to step up and take a leadership role in filling out our data collection and making sure that we're evaluating all of the data that we are collecting in order for us to really capture the perspective here in the United States. And it's really important that we are looking at this on the domestic side, because this is a set of international goals, but we are a country in that set of international goals, and if we're not fulfilling our side of the bargain, we're really not living up to those international, to the SDGs and those international promises that we made. So reflection, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. It was, Bread for the World is such an amazing organization, and I got to work with some of the most impassioned people I've ever met. And my work with them really helped teach me the importance of intersectionality, especially in social policy. So there are so many people working on all these aspects of hunger, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. So we really need to learn how to reach across those policy silos and learn to work together. I also learned a lot about the power of measurement and how important it is to decide how we're going to define issues, how we're going to define poverty, how we're going to define hunger. And it's really made me more cognizant of the idea, and I really hope to carry those lessons forward with me this spring as I write my thesis, hopefully on multidimensional poverty and food security in urban households. And lastly, I would like to say that I came away from my experience with a hope that there is, from my experience, there is a hope for a future without hunger. Instead of feeling overwhelmed or disheartened, I really felt inspired by the goals that we've set for ourselves and all the amazing people that are working on these issues. So I really appreciate the opportunity to get to work on these issues and meet all of these incredible people. Thank you.
We sometimes seem like we're living in an age of relentless pessimism, negativity, everything's wrong, everything's terrible, everything's getting worse. This is a good antidote to that, and I think that's at the heart of what your family's mission's always been, and I love seeing the students carrying that forward. And as a little tiny symbol of this year's crop of hopeful optimists, we have a little something we'd like to share with the owner. A memento of this year's class. We're not going to make you carry this, we'll make Will carry this. It's a little heavy, but I'll set it here so you can get a good look at it. It's just a collage of this group and all that they did. Thanks to all of you who were here. For those who are going to be in between years at LBJ this coming year and you're interested in this, come talk to us. We're recruiting, we're planning, I don't think we've even talked about this publicly before, we're going to increase the amount of support this year. We want to draw more people into this work, so come talk to us. The whole team's upstairs on the 3rd floor. You can find us online, reach out to any of us. We're eager to talk to you. Thank you all. Thanks.